In this episode, I talk about good fountain pen books, what's happening to all the broad nibs, and the weirdest pens I own. Hey there, Brian Goulet here of gouletpens.com, and it is episode number 153 of Goulet Q&A. And I've had a good week in the last week. Had a little bit of illness going on in the family, but all things considered, I can't complain. Both kids had a stomach bug. Rachel's had an ear infection and other things going on with her face, sinus things and all that. And it's just, we cannot catch a break. But that's all right. We're still trucking on, keeping a good attitude about it all. It's just that time of year where everybody's getting sick. Our schedule around here at work is just getting thrown around all over the place because various people are out and we're trying to have meetings, and this is crazy. So I know a lot of you empathize because you're going through kind of the same thing, but that's kind of where our world is at. But we did have this nice little period where we were all well enough to go to Disney on Ice, which we had locally here in Richmond. It was really nice. Our kids are 5 and 7, and just that perfect age where they're so gullible and they just believe everything and everything's magical, and it's just fantastic. So a lot of fun, just very kind of magical experience there. So that was pretty neat. So getting to do that was kind of a little bucket list thing for us, getting to experience that. Our son turned 7 this week. It was his birthday, so that was a good time. We're gonna have a party for him this weekend, and it's a Lego party. He's super into Legos and stuff like that, so it would be pretty nice and fun. A little small gathering for him, but that's pretty fun. Lots of family and stuff going on. So, and then I did want to show you guys. I mentioned this before, how I had a big Christmas gift that I got, and I finally brought it into work. I haven't hung it yet, so it's easy to show. So I'm a big fan of Jake Weidman, and he has this limited edition print of craftsmanship, which definitely speaks to my soul quite a bit. So I'm going to hang that up in my office here, and I just wanted to show it to you guys, but it's rather large, as you can see. Got it custom framed and everything. So that was my big Christmas gift. I'm not huge into artwork in general, but I'm a big fan of Jake's, and that piece that he did in particular really speaks to me. Craftsmanship is definitely a huge theme in my life. So I thought that was kind of cool. So splurged a little bit, got that going on, get that ugly cardboard out of the shot. There we go. So yeah, craftsmanship. So anyway, that one's kind of cool. I just want to show that off, purely selfish reasons. Let's see, what else have we got going on here? New pen this week, the Montegrappa Passion. I'm a big fan of this pen, really kind of have been infatuated. Actually, Jake is part of the reason why I'm carrying this pen, because I was sent sample this a long time ago. I really liked it, but we were really busy in the holidays and we just couldn't take on yet another pen, especially in the high-end price range, because it's a lot of work to carry a pen in this high-end range. And I saw that Jake had actually Instagrammed this. He has this pen and just touted. I mean, he's a master penman, and to talk about how much he loves writing with his pen, I was like, oh man, that's really hard for me not to carry it. So we revisited it, a few weeks ago, and it was like, yeah, okay, let's go for it. So I'm a big fan of it. Celluloid pen. It used to be close to $1,400 list price. Now the list price is down to $795. We're selling it for $716. So for all that it's got, it's definitely a pricey pen, but it's got some good things going for it. So it's sterling silver trim, which really blings quite a bit. Especially you polish it up. It will tarnish over time, so you got to polish it up. 18 karat gold nib, writes like a dream. Flows really nicely. Cartridge converter pen, which I'm fine with. It's got decent ink capacity and stuff like that. Celluloid pen, so the material feels good. It looks really great. And just all around really nice pen. So if you're in the market for a pen in this price range, I strongly urge you to take a look at this one, because it's relatively new and we got it going on. Let's see here. Also, there was a Kickstarter this week for the Art of Cursive Logic. So Cursive Logic, who has done the handwriting cursive book that we sell, started a new Kickstarter for a product that was basically an adult coloring book that incorporates learning cursive writing into the artwork. So I thought that was kind of neat. Linda let me know about that a few days before she was going to launch it, and we kind of put it on our social channels and stuff just to bring some awareness to it. And the Kickstarter got funded in 24 hours, which is pretty awesome. It was like a $5,000 Kickstarter. So props to you if you supported that. She's now trying to get a $15,000 funding to get it printed in the US, which obviously costs a little bit more, but the paper quality would be more consistent, be better, and the turnaround time will be quicker. So if she's able to get additional funding for that, that would be great. And then we don't see anything from any of that. I backed it myself with a couple of books, but and obviously we've promoted a little bit, but I think if the Kickstarter is really successful, she would look to offer it ongoing and retail it, and we would be able to carry it. So I'm pretty pumped about that opportunity. It's not like a sure bet yet, and it'll probably be months down the road, but if you are interested in that, go ahead and check out the Kickstarter there. And then another thing that we did this week, which was kind of a first for us, is we have the Cherry Blossom and the Caribbean Sea premieres, which are previous seasonal editions from a couple of years ago that we brought back. So we've had a bit of interesting things going on with the premieres lately. We have not changed the colors. Other than the seasonals, we haven't changed our regular edition colors in years, like basically since we first came out with them. We came out with the purple one 5 years ago. That was in addition to what was the original, the cappuccino, the cobalt, and the black, satin black. Satin black we discontinued years ago, but the blue has just been, kind of tapped out. So we discontinued the blue. We were hoping to have the blue through when we would announce that we were bringing these ones back as regular editions, but we kind of ran out of them, and then Edison is actually in the process literally right now, this week, of moving their entire shop. So they are kind of, supply related things. They're just not in normal operation mode. So we ran out of the blues. We ran out of the Arctic ones, the ebonite ones. So those did not run the full winter season like we were hoping. So we were going to save these for a little bit later into the spring, but because we lapsed on the other ones, we decided to carry these a little sooner. And I just want to clarify a couple of things because we've gotten a little bit of feedback about this. We've never brought back a seasonal color before as a regular edition. And I know some folks who bought it as a seasonal one are kind of like, hey, I thought this was going to be a limited special thing and now it's not so special anymore. And I get that. Like, it is certainly a consideration to be taken into account. So it's the same color, the inscription is going to be different. So the inscription you have on the original one says, this is 2014 spring edition for the Cherry Blossom, and then the 2014 summer edition. We did these back to back almost 3 years ago. So not that many people have these in the grand scheme of things. And I know I had one individual who reached out to me who was collecting the entire collection and thought maybe it was devalued because we were bringing it back as a regular thing. So, I just want to get straight, like, our intention was not to deceive anybody or anything like that, if that was even what you were thinking at all. Our whole thing is that back then, we actually didn't sell that many of these pens in the grand scheme of things. If you have one of these, you're kind of in the rare exception, especially people that are interested in them now. Not that many people are buying the whole collection, really, because, it's a $150 pen. It's not inexpensive, so not that many people are collecting them all. It's more just one-offs here and there. And our intention with these seasonal premieres is to offer them for a period of time, just like the Lamy special editions. We have like one batch, and then that's it. But we want to leave the option open to bring them back. We have no intention of bringing back a lot of them. In fact, we have no plans in the foreseeable future to bring back any of them. The one that I could possibly see, because so many people are asking for it, is the other one. I'm forgetting the official name of it. I keep wanting to call it Unicorn Barf, that one. The Water Lily. But there's no immediate plans to do that. I know that's what we get asked about a lot. So for us, it's like we're going to try to keep them to be really special. We're not going to try to bring back regular editions a lot from our seasonal collection. But we want that option mainly because certain ones like this that were years ago, they were very popular. We sold out of the material before we could finish the entire season. So we had some people who couldn't even get them that wanted to in that time frame. So we're taking all this stuff into account, but I just want to get that out there in case there's any hard feelings about that. Let me know. I'll take the heat on that directly. We took all this into account. We were not trying to dupe anybody, but I did want to clarify that these seasonals were tended to be special editions, a la the Lamy special colors, not limited editions. That's why we don't number them. That's why we offer them for kind of one batch instead of making a certain number of them and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of my intention with it all. And then that's pretty much it for like new things that we have right now. We got more stuff that's in the works for sure. A lot of things, you know, we've had some meetings and stuff. We've kind of decided on some new stuff that we're going to carry for the end of winter and into the spring here. But now we got to line it all up and, you know, get it all in and photograph it and all that. It takes a lot of work. So we'll have some new stuff that's coming out for sure pretty soon. And then, you know, we've done some cool stuff on the blog and with videos lately. We got some knock videos that are going to be coming out that I'm excited about. We've got the blog post that we did for the astrological signs, which is a fun one that Whitney helped us put together, and it was meant to be very lighthearted as well. Hopefully, I know astrology kind of walks a fine line a little bit for some folks, but it's completely meant to be, you know, kind of lighthearted and fun and not really taken that seriously. So, you know, it's kind of fun. And then the last thing before I get into the questions is NaCoWriMo starts next week, so just kind of have that on your radar. You know, there's some FPN posts and some things like that about NaCoWriMo, so if you are interested in that, it's basically International Correspondence Writing Month, so it's for anybody that wants to actually write a letter or mail a postcard or something like that. Physically write something and send it to someone. I guess you don't even have to mail it. You could just give it to people that you know, in your little area, people at work or whatever, your, you know, church or, you know, family members, whatever. So just, you know, writing intentionally something every day of the month. So it's kind of a fun thing that goes on every February. So participate in that if you're looking for a reason to write. All right, let's get into some questions for the week, shall we? This is a pen writing question starting it off here. So this is from John G on Facebook. I always pull out the nib and feed on my friction fit pens every time I clean them. This includes a Pilot Metropolitan, Pilot Falcon, Platinum 3776 Century, Lamy Safari and Al-Star, TWSBI 580, and a Vac Mini, and a Jinhao 159. I'm wondering, does the fit of a friction fit nib and feed wear down with repeated extractions? Is this kind of deep clean something I should limit to only every once in a while as opposed to every time I empty a pen? So this is a really good question because there are some pens, you know, I'll use the Edison ones as an example here. I don't think that's one of the ones you listed off there, but if I'm cleaning it, I can pull the nib and feed. Ooh, I actually need to clean this one. How about that? But you can, I'm getting ink on my fingers. That's all right. Now I know I've had a good day. You can pull the nib and feed out, and yes, theoretically, every time you're pulling the nib and feed out, you're potentially causing some wear and tear. You know, it's just like anything else, anything mechanical, anything physical that moves or changes or shifts over time will eventually wear down. I personally pull nibs and feeds out of my pens all the time. There's a lot of pens I have where I'll pull the nib and feed out every time I clean them. You know, especially something like a Metropolitan. It's an inexpensive pen in the grand scheme of things. If I shorten the lifespan of my Metropolitan by a year or so off of the 20 years or 50 years I might be using this pen, I'm not that worried about it. I view that as a good trade-off for the convenience of cleaning it out quicker. But that's me personally. So if you were to ask any pen manufacturer, they're going to say, you really shouldn't pull the nib and feed out of your pen because that voids warranty or blah, 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 because mainly because they don't know what you're going to do to it and they don't want to be held liable for any damage you could cause in the process of extraction. I personally think that the potential for damaging it or losing it or doing something to it in the process of extraction or retraction, putting it back in, is actually greater than the little bit of wear and tear you'll get from actually pulling the nib and feed out all the time. Because, you know, it's friction fit and, you know, theoretically, if it's, you know, say it's plastic feed, plastic grip, whatever, yes, theoretically it could, you know, wear down over time or something like that. I personally have never worn out a pen of mine from constantly doing that. But then again, I have a lot of pens, so maybe if you were to use one pen and clean it and take it out every single time over a number of years, it could cause some damage to it, and you kind of have to accept that risk if you're doing it. Again, it comes all to that trade-off of, is it worth it saving the time? You know, if you have something like an Edison or something like that, you can actually replace the whole nib unit housing for 25 bucks. And the rest of the pen will be fine over time. So it might be worth it to you to make it easier to clean if perhaps 8 years from now you have to replace a nib unit because you've caused wear on it. It's all just, it depends on your style, depends on how you're doing it and stuff like that. Some pens, like the TWSBI ones, the feeds are a little more fragile, like the fins are more flexible on that one, so you could potentially cause some more damage with that one. The Jinhaos, I really wouldn't sweat it at all, they're so inexpensive. Lamy Safari and Al-Star, I have heard of some people that their nib doesn't fit quite the same because the wings on the feed on the Lamy Safari is a little more fragile than some of these other feed systems that you've mentioned. So that one I might be, just kind of aware could happen. They don't sell replacement feeds either, so it's a little more difficult to get those replaced. Again, they're not a super expensive pen, so if over years it happens, it's not the end of the world, but still. So I would say the Lamys, I would definitely try not to take the feeds out that often, because the feeds are not super easy to get out, and to get them back in, if you do it wrong, you can completely damage your feed. So you have to know exactly how to get it back in there. The nib, if the nib ends up getting a little bit loose, you can actually bend the wings on the nib a little bit to fit it back on there tight. But again, if you do it wrong, you could cause some damage on it. So that's the only one where I'm kind of like, I wouldn't mess with that too much. And then the Falcon, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I don't know a lot of people that typically remove the Falcon nib and feed. That one's a little more difficult to do, especially the first time, partly because of the design. It doesn't have like, big fins on it. It's just got like a little smooth section on the grip, or on the feed. It's hard to grab. You can definitely pull it out if you're intentional about it, but that one, I may just kind of throw some caution at a little bit too. It's more potential to damage that one. 3776 Century, you're pretty good. That one's relatively easy to remove these days. The old version of the 3776 is not as easy to remove. The Century versions, though, since they changed over to that 3-4 years ago, something like that, they're pretty good now, so I wouldn't sweat that one too much. But yeah, I would say, there's definitely some pens that they even put like explicit things, like the Pilot Custom 823. You can remove the nib and feed on that one, but they say explicitly on there, do not do that for warranty purposes. So keep that in mind. Anything that you're doing like this, you're basically voiding the warranty if you pull out the nib and the feed. If there's any damage that's caused, they're going to say, well, you did something to it. How can we say it's our defect and not something you did? Which there's a point to that. So just keep that in mind, especially in these more expensive pens. You get into the Falcon and the Centuries and stuff like that. Keep in mind that you're keeping that that responsibility on yourself whenever you start pulling your pen apart. It's up to you whether you want to do that or not. I don't know that you have to do that every time you clean a pen, especially if you're going to be inking it up with the same color or a very similar color. Like I have certain pens where I always ink it up with blue, and that's just all that ever goes in there. So I'll clean it, but I don't, beat myself up about cleaning it all the way through every single time I clean the pen. Sometimes you just need to flush it out a bit, and then you ink it back up and it's good to go. That's the nice thing about fountain pen ink, is it's water-based. So if there's a little bit of something left in there, if you know that it's a conventional ink and it's not something like Bay State Blue, where if it mixes with a regular ink it can cause some issues. If you know it's just conventional ink going to another conventional ink, you don't have to completely take the thing apart and clean it all out like showroom condition, before you ink it up with something else. You can do a little lazier clean in between if it's going to be the same color or something similar. So you definitely don't need to clean every time, but you may prefer to do that. And yeah, I think I pretty much exhausted everything I know about that question. So hopefully that helps you out. All right, this next question is from Furstenberg on Instagram. Can you recommend some books about fountain pens, ink, and paper? Books, huh? Physical books. So I deal mainly in the online world. I've come to know fountain pens. I didn't know anything about fountain pens pre-internet. Everything I've discovered about fountain pens has been basically online. So the whole idea of getting into physical books about pens for me is relatively new, and I will say I am not the most exhaustive resource to answer that, but I can at least maybe point you somewhat in the right direction. So the one series of books that I personally have found that is the most comprehensive is by Andy Lambrow. This is his Fountain Pens of Japan book. It's very thick. The pictures are fantastic, and the information is really good. Like, this is renowned as some of the best fountain pen books around today. Fountain pens have been around for a long time, and so there are a lot of books, especially some older books, that could be available. Not a lot of them are in print anymore, so you may have to find them through pen shows or eBay, or various, Fountain Pen Network may have some stuff. I scoured Fountain Pen Network and didn't find a ton of very comprehensive resources. I found like one good thread that, pretty much confirmed that the Andy Lambrow books are amazing. So he's got Fountain Pens of Japan, he's got Fountain Pens of the World, he's got the United States and the UK, he's got some other ones called Vintage and Modern. So check out his books. They are expensive. I think I paid $150 for this book. maybe even more. Sometimes you can get them a little bit cheaper, but they're expensive. You might be able to get them used sometimes, but they're extremely comprehensive. If you're a really avid fountain pen enthusiast, having these books will be a really worthwhile investment for you. Most of the other books that I've seen, and again, I don't know everything that's out there, most of the other ones I've seen are brand specific. You know, for example, I have this book. It's a Sheaffer book that came out when they hit their 100-year anniversary. I actually got this from, since we're a Sheaffer retailer, I actually got this from them. So I don't know if this book is still readily available or whatever, but it's just all the history of Sheaffer, and it kind of just takes you through all the old stuff. It's got old advertisements and stuff that used to be in there. So this, I think, is more typical of what you see with fountain pen books. A lot of them are historical, since fountain pens have been around for such a long time. A lot of the information that's available today is just posted on websites and blogs and online and stuff. I don't know that there's many physical books being published today in terms of fountain pen history, but they're probably updated versions of ones that have been out for a while. But you'll see a lot of brand-specific ones, Pelican, Parker, Sheaffer, you know, things like that. So if you're looking for something specific, literally if you just go to eBay or Fountain Pen Network or something like that and you type in like, you know, Parker fountain pen book, Parker history book, stuff like that, you'll probably find those pretty easily. There's kind of just too many to mention, and I haven't read a lot of those specific ones to say like, this version is really the best version for you. You just kind of gotta look brand specific for yourself. There's no, a couple of good resources. This is not a physical book, but an ebook. Richard Binder, he's, you know, a nibmeister and has been in the industry for 15, 20 years. So he has some good ebooks that you may want to consider. I bought mine through iTunes, iTunes iBooks or whatever it's called. You know, it's a couple of bucks per book. It's very worthwhile. He's got several different ones. He's got some that are more geared towards vintage pens, some that are geared to, like in repair and stuff like that. He's got some that are more towards like pen shows and, you know, what to look for and stuff like that. So that's a really, really good resource too. I point you to that. I don't have anything physically to show you there, unless I pulled up my phone and show you, but it wouldn't show very well. And then yeah, that's that. And then there's some like handwriting type books. You know, we sell Cursive Logic. That's definitely a good version. They got the new one, the Kickstarter, that is just coming out. That's for actually like teaching yourself cursive. Also, Michael Sull, he's a master penman, has a good book called, what's the official name here? Let me pull it up. The American Cursive Handwriting. So that, I actually don't I have it at home. I forgot to bring it in, but it's a very comprehensive, it's not a bound book. It's actually 3-hole punch and made to be put in a binder, because he says when you're practicing the handwriting, it's actually easier to pull out an individual sheet and copy off it. So he doesn't like to bind his book, but that's very comprehensive. I think I paid $50 for it or something like that, but it covers a lot of history of handwriting and, you know, why handwriting developed as it has and how to have good posture and all that kind of stuff. So that's a really good resource. When it comes to ink and paper, I don't know of any book that covers just those things, especially paper. I mean, I'm sure there's all kinds of great books about paper in general, but I don't think there's a good book on fountain pen paper, especially because paper quality can shift and change so quickly in the manufacturing process. There's, you know, other than like Rhodia Clairefontaine, I don't know of like one brand that's been like fountain pen friendly paper for a long, consistent period of time. You know, obviously we focus on carrying a lot of fountain pen friendly paper here at Goulet Pens, but I don't know that there's any book or anything that's comprehensive about that kind of stuff. And then when it comes to ink, I think most of the ink you're going to find built into other existing like fountain pen history books. For most people, ink is not their focus, it's the pens, and then the ink is kind of like an afterthought, especially from like a historical perspective. It's really more about, you know, it's kind of like the car and then like the accessories you have with the car or the tires that you put on your car. That's kind of like what the ink is. It's like an accessory to the fountain pen usually, you know. So I hope I'm wrong. I wonder if there's other stuff out there, and I'm actually going to make that the question of the week this week, about what books and resources there are. So if you have any, I would really love to know what good resources there are out there. In my 7 years of kind of passively looking and, you know, 45 minutes of actively looking last night as I was prepping for this, was not able to find anything really good about that. All right, next question. This is from Fabio1689 on Instagram. Why aren't y'all selling more broader nibs? I feel sad every time I see a pen I like on gouletpens.com, but its double broad version nib isn't available. The only option is getting a 1.1mm stub, but that's not quite the same. That said, the Goulet 1.1 is awesome, thank you. Are we wet and juicy broad nib lovers such a minority? And also, can you tell from your sales stats where your broader nibs are mostly sold to? Like, you know, Europe, Asia, so on. So yes, this is one of those things that there is a very vocal minority of people who like broad nibs. And I can say from a retailing side of things, people just don't buy them. Like, there just aren't that many people buying broad nibs. That's why you see them going the way of the dodo. I don't know exactly why. I've only been in this business for 7 years, and for the first couple of years, I wasn't hot and heavy into pens really at all. It was mainly ink and paper, and I started to get into pens, and it was only low-end stuff that really didn't have a lot of broad nibs available anyway. As I've gotten into some of the higher-end stuff, that's where demand for broad nibs, when you get into Pelicans and Viscontis and that kind of stuff, that's where people really want the broad nibs. I think a lot of it has to do with paper quality. If you have a broad or a double broad nib and you're using really junky absorbent paper at work or at school or whatever, it's just not going to look good, and it's going to bleed through, and it's going to be really frustrating. You're going to have to write huge, and you may not have the lines to do that. So a lot of people, if they don't have control over their paper quality, a broad nib is just too much. It's a fire hose. They can't contain it, and it just looks bad. Other people say their handwriting looks horrible with a broad nib. It looks better with a fine nib. I still am mystified by that because I'm the complete opposite. My handwriting looks chicken scratchy if I write in a pretty good size, like size of my handwriting, but it's a very fine nib. It like looks all shaky, and it looks really weird. Whereas if I have a broader nib, it kind of like smooths that out a little bit. I like broader nibs. I like the way they show off the ink. You get more shading, you get that kind of stuff. But again, it's only on really good paper. So I think unless you're really devoted and have control over your paper, broad nibs are just too intense for most people. So I think there's it's kind of like a cart before the horse thing. If there's not a lot of broad nibs available, not a lot of people can try broad nibs. But then, you know, if they do try them and they don't really like them, they're not going to buy them. And if people aren't buying them, then manufacturers aren't going to make them available. So I think that's a lot of what's going on. As you have, you know, really not a whole ton of nib customizing options out there, you know, broad nibs and double broads and stuff like that. A lot of people like to turn them into obliques or like to have the extra tipping material on there to grind it into different things. But there's not a lot of people doing that these days. I think some people want to. It's just not as readily available. There's a handful of nibmeisters out there that do that kind of stuff, but they usually have really long wait lists. So people are kind of just looking for something more off the shelf, which is where the stub nibs are really nice. But in terms of actual demand for broad nibs, they're just not really there. Like, for example, you know, we carry some Conklin pens. Conklin themselves decided to discontinue offering their broad nibs because when pen manufacturers are looking to do broad nibs, some pen manufacturers make their own nibs, which usually they have a little more flexibility in terms of offering them because they don't have to make them in huge quantities necessarily. They have a little more control over their inventory. When you're looking to buy from Bock or Jovo or some other nib manufacturer, you have to buy in pretty sizable quantities for some of these pens. And so if they are looking, especially if you customize them with your logo and if you're stamping your logo, like ours are laser etched, you know, and that's why we offer broad nibs on the Goulet nibs, is because we laser etch them. We don't have to buy them in insane quantities. But if you were getting them stamped, then you have to buy them in very large quantities. There's a lot of tooling costs involved with that. So, you know, you have to really be committed, and there has to be a lot of demand for it. Otherwise, they're just not going to sell. So that's what happens. Is a lot of times a pen maker will offer a full range of nibs at the onset, and those broad nibs just don't sell over time. So they just kind of let them fizzle out, and then they don't reorder when it comes time to reorder because there's just not that many people buying them, and they don't want to have to buy. I'm not joking. Sometimes you have to buy 50,000 nibs at a time. And if you have to buy 50,000 broad nibs and you sell 2,000 a year, no one wants to carry 25 years of inventory on broad nibs, so they just don't carry it anymore. So that's where it is. So there will become a natural equilibrium at some point when people that want broad nibs so desperately will buy whatever pen is available with a broad nib, and then those manufacturers will sell enough of those broad nibs to continue to offer them. But there's not a lot, that are kind of still doing that. And even for us, like some of the pens that we carry are available in a broad nib, but no one buys them. So we're not going to carry the whole stock of the pen, or we'll try it with the broad nib and we'll carry like 2 pens and it just doesn't sell. And so we discontinue it after a few months because we're sitting there with 2 pens after 6 months. No one's bought any. And so why would we offer it? So it's all supply and demand, really. That's pretty much all it is. So if you guys want broad nibs, you got to buy them. It's flat out, which I know seems weird because you can't really buy them if they're not available. It's like a catch-22, right? The other part of your question is, can we look at where they're selling and all this kind of stuff? We sell the vast majority to these like Western European countries. We don't sell, a lot to Asia, but I know that in general, that Asia is finer nibs. That's just the writing style, and that's just what works for the characters and stuff that they write with. And so it's not nearly as much in demand to have broad nibs. And most of the Japanese companies, they'll have pens. I mean, they might do broad nibs, and actually the broad nibs are pretty wet, like Pilot and Platinum and stuff. But a lot of times they just won't even have them. For example, the Pilot Metropolitan, they don't even offer a broad. It's just fine and medium, and they're pretty much on the fine side. It's just not as much of a focus for them. Cool. All right, let's talk about ink, shall we? One ink question this week from Thomas C. on Facebook. Is it possible that the ink in a cartridge would write different from a bottle? I've been sucking out J-Herbon Pearl Noir ink from cartridges and storing it in sample bottles. I just received a 30 ml bottle from you, and it seems like it writes different in my E95S. Pilot E95S. I'm assuming the reason you're sucking it out of cartridges is because you want to use it in a pen that doesn't take that cartridge. Personally, I think if you're using a lot of cartridges just for the ink, you're paying too much. You're paying like 4 times the price that you would in a bottle, maybe even more, depending on the cartridge. So the J-Herbon Pearl Noir that you're using is a standard international cartridge, and you're trying to use in a Pilot, it's a different type of thing. So I can understand if you're decanting it for that reason. But generally speaking, it does not make economic sense for you to suck the ink out of a cartridge and use it in a conventional way. So, and like as you would with a bottle filling ink. But that said, my experience has been with cartridges. Generally, it's consistent. It's the same ink that they're putting in both. I've seen in rare circumstances where, there's basically, I don't know if this is true for all pens, but I know that at least standard international cartridges, there's like Slovenia is like the place where cartridges are done. Like, I don't know if, I don't know if every manufacturer uses, the ink cartridge folks in Slovenia. I don't even know like what company or who it is or anything like that, but I've heard enough to know that Slovenia is like the ink cartridge producing capital of the world. Who knew, right? So that's just, they got the process down, they do it well. It doesn't make sense economically probably for anybody to do it anywhere else. That's just like the place. So I think a lot of manufacturers send their ink there, and then it gets put into the cartridges, and then that's how it gets done. But I don't know if that's the process for like Pilot and Lamy and all these other things. I just know, very little bit. So I may be speaking outside my wheelhouse right here. Full disclaimers, not trying to speak on any individual manufacturer's behalf. I just heard enough to know that that is really kind of a central place where things get done. For cartridges specifically, not bottles. Bottles are a whole different story, but cartridges, they've got the process down there. Again, it's standard international, so standardizing it internationally makes sense, right? For economic sake. So that said, it's my impression, my understanding that the ink is the same in all of them. I think in rare cases that could be maybe slightly different, but I don't know for sure that that is the case, especially with J-Herbon. I do not believe that's the case. It's my understanding that it's the same ink. I think what could be happening here, these cartridges, I've seen them when they sit there over time for a very long time. I'm talking like a couple of years. You can have some evaporation that happens. Even though it's sealed up, you get some leaching that can happen through, there's a name for this process, I meant to look it up, and I forgot it, but the process of moisture wicking through plastic. And the plastic that's used in ink cartridges is a disposable plastic. It's that the cartridges are not meant to be stored for years and years and years and years. They're meant to be used and then thrown away. So it's not as impermeable a plastic as some of the other things, like specifically some of the ink manufacturers that put their ink in plastic bottles. It's a different type of plastic that's used there than there are in the disposable cartridges. So over a couple of years, there could be more leaching in cartridge form than there would be in bottle form, especially if it's glass. You're not going to get that with glass, but even in plastic bottles, it's not going to be as much an issue with ink in a plastic bottle versus a plastic cartridge. Does that make sense? So you can sometimes get that, and what happens is you'll get some of the moisture will evaporate, but the dye, the concentrated dye, is left in the cartridge. So you end up with a more concentrated version of the ink that writes a little drier, doesn't flow quite as smoothly as what you are dealing with in bottle form that maybe doesn't have that situation. So if you have cartridges that have been sitting around for a while, maybe there's been some leaching going on, and then you are used to using that, and then you switch to a bottle, the properties might seem a little different just because of the evaporation factor. So I think that may be a factor here based on what you're saying. Other than that, I'm kind of mystified. I don't really know what would explain that, but I think that could be the case. All right. So this next question is a paper question. This is from Howard S. in an email. It says, I've been experimenting with a number of inks lately. During my workday, I use my Leuchtturm regularly to take notes of discussions, action items, assignments, etc. I notice that some inks are able to sheen more than others as you turn the page from the previous note. I know, oh sorry, not sheen. Let me back that up because that's a whole different question. I notice that some inks are able to be seen more than others as you turn the page from the previous note. I know the weight of the paper, so he's talking about ghosting or see-through on the other side of the page. I know that the weight of the paper has a lot to do with it, but is there some characteristic of the inks that are noted in the ink reviews to avoid that there are more visible on the next page? So you specifically mentioned Leuchtturm, so I've got mine here. This is one of mine that I use on a less regular basis because, you know, this green is just not super my color. But they sent this to me with my name on it, so I figured I should probably use it. Let me turn to a part that I've written on. So as you're writing on the paper, you know, it looks really good. Yes, okay, paper is really nice. But when you're flipping onto the back side, you can see the imprint of what's on there. Can you really see that well? I don't know how well you can see it if my monitor is really displaying. So you can see that there is an impression left on the other side, and you're like, oh my gosh, I can almost read that through the other page. And this is some good quality paper too. This isn't cheap stuff. If you had thinner paper, certainly you could read through it even more, like Tomoe River has even more ghosting going on. But I wrote here as an example, so you can see like, okay, here it is. I've used a pretty dark saturated ink for sure. And when you flip it over, in the parts that I haven't written on, it seems like, whoa, I can see everything that's on the other side. But when you write on the primary side, you notice right here, I wrote over top of something I wrote on the other side, but it really doesn't distract that much. It's not that prominent. So it really only becomes a problem if it's particularly thin paper and you get it actually starting to bleed through onto the other side. Like if you could actually, you can't see bleed through on this paper, but if you could see it actually starting to show like as if you'd written on this side of it because it's absorbed so much that's coming through the other side, that's when it becomes a problem. That's much less of an issue with Leuchtturm than it is with some other paper brands that you may have used before. So this was an example of like, okay, yes, there is some ghosting, but it's not really a problem once you write on the other side, unless it's just your particular thing. You're like, I don't want to see through the other side at all. Then you're going to have a bit of a hard time because most paper is going to do that. And you may want to experiment a little bit with nibs and inks and stuff like that. So there's definitely a factor of the paper. I mean, that's a huge component to it, just like you mentioned here. I think that the ink can also be a factor. The absorbency of the ink, the level of saturation, certainly the color you're using. If you're using a very dark, saturated color, then it's going to be more likely to want to ghost on the other side because there's, you know, more of a contrast there than if I was using a lighter, lesser, more watery looking ink on the other side that was maybe more of a brown tinge or a yellow tinge or something like that. It would blend in a little bit more. The paper wouldn't show quite as drastically as this dark blue is. So certainly ink is a factor in terms of its coloration and saturation. And then there's also a factor of the absorbency, like how absorbent it is into the paper. Because like I mentioned, you get sometimes what's called bleed through, where the ink actually soaks all the way through the paper and starts to come out the other side. That is generally a problem and not considered fountain pen friendly paper quite as much. And certainly if you're using a flex pen or you're putting down a ton of ink, even on good paper, that is a tendency to happen sometimes. If you are running into a situation where you're getting ghosting and stuff like that, that's where you should, or like bleed through and stuff, that's where you should really consider going with a narrower nib size and maybe switching to a different type of ink, because that one is just absorbing too much. So the second part of your question here is there some like way that you can know in the reviews or in the advertising of the ink or something about how much it's going to do that? Unfortunately, there is not. That's part of the experience of experimenting with all these different inks and whatnot, is because there's no standard, characteristic that's called, ink resistant or like bleed resistant ink, or minimal ghosting factors or something like that. There's nothing like that on basically any of these inks. The only ink that I'm even aware of that even addresses anything like that is Noodler's X-Feather. Is designed to not bleed through the page as much. That's the only ink that I can name you out of all of the 600, 700 some that I've come across in my time that addresses anything about like absorbency qualities or anything like that. Now, sometimes you'll get quick dry inks, which sort of is a different factor, but quick drying inks usually absorb even more into the paper. That's why they dry so quick. They dry quick to the touch by absorbing quickly and spreading out into the paper. They usually bleed through worse. So stay away from quick drying inks. Stay away from lubricated inks like Noodler's Eel if you want less absorbency, because the more lubrication there is, the more it kind of flows out of the pen and gets all over the place and it writes wetter. So stay away from those. Other than that, it's going to be trial and error, my friend. So really the only thing you can do is actually read individual bloggers' reviews or product reviews where people specifically say those characteristics and how they perform and stuff like that. So that's why we offer samples, because, and even if honestly, if you have a review or something like that and somebody's like, yeah, there's minimal ghosting on everything, it's like, it really is going to depend on the paper too. You may use somebody else may be saying, oh yeah, no ghosting, a problem whatsoever, but you may have a journal that's like newsprint, type paper, and it just bleeds everything. And you're like, well, I read this review and it says it doesn't bleed. Oh, that's because they were using an extra fine nib with Clairefontaine Triomphe. Well, duh, nothing is going to bleed through that. But if you're using, a flex nib with, a newspaper doing your crossword puzzle, of course it's going to bleed through, so it's like, you always have to take that with a grain of salt, and your own experimentation and stuff like that is going to pretty much be your best bet to get absolute confirmation of what is going to perform the best. All right, I got a couple of business questions to close it out, and then a personal question as well. I got 3 questions left, so we're rolling along nicely here today. This is a business question. This is from Snailessence on Instagram. How do you keep $5,000 pens in stock? Isn't the inventory cost very high? Well, that's a pretty straightforward question, and the short answer is, yeah, it is high. If you want to sell expensive pens, you got to pony up the dough to carry the expensive pens. It's pretty much like anything else. There's no magic to it. If you want to sell expensive stuff, you got to buy expensive stuff. That's about it. That's why, if you look historically, if you've been following Goulet pens for a while, we did not always sell $5,000 pens. We really don't sell that many $5,000 pens now, by the way. There's a difference between having it available for sale and actually selling it. That's a whole other thing. But yes, if you want to offer $5,000 pens, you have to buy $5,000 pens to offer. For the first year of Goulet pens, we didn't sell any pens because we couldn't afford to. Basically, we had to sell paper and ink only because we couldn't afford pens. We had no money. We had nothing. We had like $2,000 when we started our business, which, if you're starting a business, is like nothing practically. So that's what we started out with Goulet pens, was $2,000 and a dream, right? So Rachel and I worked our tails off. We carried $5 Triomphe pads, and we would buy a 10-pack at a time and then sell them. Once we got down to 2 of them, we'd order another 10-pack, just because we had no money. So we had to reinvest everything in inventory. So over time, over now more than 7 years that we've been doing this, we now have enough money because we don't want to do debt. We're debt free here. So we do everything based off of, we're buying our inventory based off of the previous sales and profits that we have from previously, which, you know, from a business standpoint, but an inventory-based business is very difficult to do that. And to grow at the pace that we have and to actually pay for all of your inventory is difficult to do. We spend a lot of our time and energy managing that very closely because we feel that that's a prudent and responsible thing for us to do. Not everybody does it that way. Most people don't do it that way. No judgment if you do. That's a risk that you're taking on when you're running a business, is to take on debt. That Rachel and I just have not wanted to do that. So we've tried as hard as we could to do it our way. So yes, we have not always offered very expensive pens. So now, as we're getting more into expensive pens, that's the reason why sometimes we'll offer them for a little bit and then take them away, or we'll offer them but really limit the nib sizes, or only carry, like the Passion, for example, the monographic Passion, really good example. We're carrying this pen right now. It is not an inexpensive pen. It's available in 4 colors, and there's like 5, 6 different nib sizes available for this pen. We're offering 3 nib sizes on 2 of the colors because we think that's going to do best. If they do really well, we get a lot of demand for the other ones, we'll then buy the other ones to offer. But at the onset, for a $700 pen, we're not just going to go nuts and carry everything when there's a bit of speculation to it. So, you know, there's the decisions like that that we'll make to be smart about how we get into the higher end stuff especially, and we have to keep a close eye on all that. Now that said, when you get into the really expensive, like $5,000 is a lot of money for a pen, a lot of money, even for, you know, a prominent retailer, if you would consider us to be that. So for us, when we get into pens in that price range, usually there's a bit of, working with us that the manufacturer or the distributor will do, because pens that get that expensive, there's just not that many people buying $5,000 pens. So when you consider how many thousands or tens of thousands of pen retailers there are just in the United States alone, not everybody, I mean, if you're talking about, like, I'm trying to think of an expensive pen, you know, like the $5,000 pens, I mean, you're talking like Namikis and stuff like that. There might be, for some of the high-end Namikis, there might be 20 or 30 of those pens in the US, period, ever. You know, to have every single retailer try to stock them when there's only 20 or 30 pens, it's not possible, you know what I mean? So a lot of them will put it on their site and have like a special order option, or do a pre-order or a consignment or something like that, where they'll put it on the site just to advertise it, and then if somebody is interested in it, then they'll actually coordinate the sale at that time. But when you get into pens in that price range, there's not even enough pens for every retailer to carry even one of them in their actual store. So that's where things can get creative sometimes behind the scenes, to just kind of bring awareness to these higher end pens, but not everybody has to stock them, if that makes sense. So that's part of where you see some of these high end pens. Now, Rachel and I specifically don't like to do that often. We like to have things ready and available here at all times because we like to ship quick. We like to know exactly the quality. We like to take our own pictures and all that kind of stuff. That gets difficult with $5,000 pens, so that's where, you know, things can get a little creative sometimes. But in general, we try to carry everything quickly and easily, and then we can know the quality, we can expect it, and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's pretty much where you're at. You get into the high-end stuff, it's expensive, even as a retailer. All right, so this one is from borasanuk on YouTube. Hopefully I pronounced that even something near right. All right, so this is a question based off of last week when I showed you some of the interesting things that people have sent me to sell. This question says, what about having a category just for those small makers? From a business standpoint, it may not be profitable to work with small manufacturers, but creating a platform for them to sell one-off or small batch pens through your store would ultimately help the community grow. Since you'd be putting these products in a separate category created just for them and only them, the buyer would be very well aware of the nature of what they're purchasing. Steam Greenlight comes to mind as an example in terms of giving new makers a chance. What are your thoughts on this? I wish I'd looked up Steam Greenlight. I was preparing this at like midnight last night, so I did not have time to research it. So I have no idea what that is, but My thoughts on that is essentially that's creating a whole separate business model. Even if it's not profitable, it's still a business model. That's very much a divergent from what we're already doing, which requires a lot of time and effort. And I just can't see that really being prudent of us to do that at this point in time. There's already things like that. Like essentially what you're talking about is setting up a marketplace. Like if you think about Etsy, eBay, Amazon has it, Sears, Newegg, like there's a lot of different websites that generate a lot of traffic, a lot of people that visit it, and they sell stuff, but there's not stuff that's in their warehouse. It's just they have third-party sellers that just list their stuff there. That's essentially what you're talking about here, but you're setting it, more as a fountain pen kind of focused example. That's a whole different thing than what we do here. We retail directly all of our stuff, and then getting into third-party marketplace kind of stuff, like essentially you can't do that. You can't accommodate the increased traffic on your site and the bandwidth because there's cost associated with all that. There's definitely time in setting all that up and physically pictures and all that, making it look consistent, product descriptions. It takes a tremendous amount of time to set all that up. We can't do all that for free. We have to charge something for that. So we would have to do something like, Amazon or eBay, where we would have to charge a fee in order to do that. And then you're literally, it's a whole different business model. We're setting up a marketplace site and attached to our site. And that is just way too much of a distraction from what we're already doing because we got enough going on as it is. So certainly conceptually something like that could work, but there's a number of sites like that already. Kickstarter is a great example of a place where small people, small manufacturers, people with just ideas and they're prototyping and stuff can get ideas out there, get some funding, and then create their stuff. That's a way better way to go about it than just listing something on like a marketplace and hoping that you start to sell a few, and it would take forever to build it up like that. I think Kickstarter is a great way to do it. If you've seen Keras Customs do that, you've seen Tactile Turn do it, Cursive Logic, they've all started with ideas and prototypes that have taken steam, and now they are retailing, at a mass scale or more mass scale because of the momentum they got on Kickstarter. So that's already going on, and they got a good thing going there. We frankly don't have enough traction here to really get somebody off the ground like that. Even, yes, somebody could offer a one-time thing here and there, but we would have to charge such insane fees to set all that stuff up. If it's like one-offs and just a couple of products, it just wouldn't make sense economically. I can pretty much say that right now. But I think there's some great resources like that. Etsy is a great example of people that can make one-of-a-kind things and sell them. And I think, honestly, between the effort that you would take to like list that and do it all on our site and the fees you pay and all that, you're probably better off just like using Instagram and just building up a following on Instagram and just connecting with a bunch of other, fountain pen, fanatic people, and then creating your product and then showcasing it on there and then offering it for sale through something like Kickstarter or Etsy or something like that and bringing awareness to it. There's custom oblique nib holder people that I follow on Instagram, and they put their pictures on Instagram and people get excited and they say, go to my Etsy store and buy it. And it's like, I can never even see them available because in 9 minutes they're all sold out. That's a great way to go about it. And then you're paying minimal fees and you're not having to deal with really anybody else. So there's already a lot of good stuff like that out there. I think conceptually it seems like it could work, but I just don't think I don't think we're big enough to really it would make sense, and we'd have to charge really high fees to make that happen. And if we were going to do that, we might as well just retail the stuff because that's most of the work we're doing anyway. It's just the logistics of shipping it and coordinating payment and stuff that would be different. But yeah, we pretty much have to charge basically what we'd do for retailing anyway. So neat idea, but in execution it would be kind of challenging. All right, and then last question I have for this week. It's kind of a fun one. This is a personal question I got through Twitter from Archimage. We went through this a couple weeks ago. What's the weirdest or novelty pen that you own? So I thought this was a fun question, and I actually could not decide on just one, so I wanted to showcase some of the interesting pens that I have and see what you guys think. So some of these are just not that crazy, but they're just kind of unique and different, so I like them. I'll start off with a couple that I made back in the day because I was experimental and did not have some of the greatest ideas, but sometimes you have to just kind of get them out and before they happen. So the first day that I ever made a pen, I made a wood pen. This is a ballpoint, yes, but I was not into fountain pens at that time, so you can forgive me. I call this my bowling pen because it looks like a bowling pin. I was like, oh, well, it's a really thin pen. I was like, what if I made it really comfortable for a grip? And it looks huge. And Rachel was like, what is that? And it's kind of a joke pen now, but certainly precious to me for its memories only, not for the actual aesthetics. But it's actually not too terribly uncomfortable. That's why I designed it this way. But it certainly looks odd, and you can't really like put it in your pocket or anything because it bulges out. Anyway, kind of fun. And then another pen that I'd made that's also kind of weird. Maybe I should zoom in a little bit as I'm answering these ones. I'll show you the pens a little bit more. This one is my kind of magic wand pen. It looks pretty ugly, and clearly I did not have the greatest aesthetic in mind when I was doing this. Oh, I don't even have a nib on it. That's pretty funny. The nib and the grip is missing on it, but anyway, you could imagine what it looked like if it had a fountain pen nib on it. But this one I made it to be long, kind of like a wand, sort of, and I laminated it. So this is canary wood here, so it's a nice yellow wood, and then I have purple heart and then Paduke. So this is a purple wood and an orange wood. So I wanted to have various colors of wood in here, and literally I just cut at kind of an angle, and then I glued in different strips of other colored woods and did it a couple different angles. So I actually think that's kind of neat. The pattern is not particularly anything specific, and the pen is very long and awkward, and you know, Rachel kind of makes fun of me as well. I don't know why I keep mixing like purple and yellow. Like they're contrasting colors. They're not complementary or anything. And anyway, so, and if you thread it right, it lines up so that it's kind of interesting like that. But anyway, that's what's going on with this pen. So it's like a little conductor wand kind of thing, a little odd. Those are my pens. To get into some other like commercially made ones that are kind of interesting, I'll start out with these ones because I don't think they're weird necessarily. They just maybe have some, people have some opinions about the aesthetics. I've posted this on Instagram, my personal Instagram recently. This is the Mont Blanc Leo Tolstoy, and a lot of people think that it just looks like a Franken pen, or like it was kind of hodgepodge together. I'm not so offended by it. I think it's kind of nice. It does look a little odd with the blue and all that. I mean, it's intentional in its design because Mont Blanc definitely knows how to design some stuff, but a lot of people comment that this pen definitely looks like it's three different pens kind of put together. So kind of interesting, bit of a novelty for me. And along those lines, I find this pen to be very appealing. It is definitely a little odd though. This is the Delta Magnifica Amalfi, and it definitely has some interesting things going on with the white and the different blues and gold and the turquoise and all that. It's a really nice pen, and it's a limited edition that they've done, but pretty much everybody in the olive wood too. So it's got a lot of intentionality behind it, you know, kind of like the Mont Blanc, but I compare these two. Actually, I've taken some pictures of the two of these. I'm going to put it on my personal Instagram shortly to see, like, would you rather, you know, which pen would you rather have? But that's another interesting one. This is another kind of novelty one that I have. I never write with this pen, but it's kind of interesting. It's called the Stipula Da Vinci. So it's got some interesting things going on with it. It's a retractable nib, so you actually twist it, and this little hood kind of opens up, and then the nib comes out like so. It takes like 8 turns to make it happen, and it's a very large, kind of awkward pen. But it's a nice pen, like it's manufactured well, and the design is really interesting. The engineering is neat, how it just kind of like retracts in there, and then it has the little hood that just kind of closes like that. So it's interesting in that respect, not uber practical, definitely more of a novelty. And then this part too, the clip actually, you know, you just turn the ring and the clip can go out or in depending on how thick your clothing is. Another cool engineering piece that you know, it's not particularly, you know, make or break. Another one, this is kind of a cool one that I really like, but I always think of Dr. Mario, like the pill Dr. Mario, you know, the Tetris game from like 90s, the Stipula Passaporto. Now, they had this pen a number of years ago, and from what I understand, they're bringing it back. This is one that we are definitely considering carrying, so get pumped about that. And it's going to be lower priced than it was last time it was out too. Very small kind of pocket pen, but it's really just because it looks like Dr. Mario that I kind of find of a novelty. There you go. I find it kind of a novelty. Switched on my letters there. Another interesting one, this is the Pilot Vortex, which was not available in the US from my understanding. I had some customers send it to me. But now I understand it's discontinued anyway, so you can't get it even if you want it. Inexpensive pen, but it's just has kind of an interesting, it's got like a kind of a semi-hooded nib thing going on there. Really long, you know, kind of like bumpy thing. It just looks very kind of futuristic, very Jetsons-like, and very long grip and kind of interesting. So to me, it's kind of just like, oh, that's interesting, Pilot. I actually probably would think that's pretty cool if they offered it here, but they discontinued it, so it probably wasn't that popular. This one is called the Stipulus Speed, which they have discontinued in a fountain pen version. I think they still have a ballpoint version if you're so inclined. But just kind of, it's one that we had considered carrying and decided not to, just because it was a little too unconventional for our tastes. But there you go, Stipulus Speed. Of course, I have the Pelican Twist. This is a kind of triangular twisting pen. This is a kid pen, really, that's how it's marketed. And the grip is actually really nice. It's actually a really good writing pen, but it's just very unconventional, no clip or anything like that. Pelican Twist. This one I actually find very oddly appealing. This is a Lamy pen from the 90s, the Lamy Lady, affectionately known in the Goulet turf here as the Golden Cow. So it definitely has kind of like a cow print going on. It's actually got a really interesting, unique 14 karat nib on here. It writes really great, but it's definitely an unconventional pen, and it has roll stops instead of a clip. So interesting stuff. Lamy, maybe you want to bring it back. I don't know. And then I've got two more to kind of close it out here. This is, it's a beautiful pen. It's called the Selfie pen. It's not a fountain pen, but it's just very interesting. And how do I even operate this thing? I don't remember. Okay, so you twist the top, and the pen tip comes out. Excuse me. You untwist it, and it has a electrostatic, what's it called? Stylus tip that you can use on an iPad or phone or whatever. And then it has a built-in camera with, no, sorry, not a camera. It has a built-in Bluetooth receiver. You connect it to your phone through Bluetooth, and then this acts as a remote shutter for your phone. So you can take your phone, you can set it up, and you can, have a bunch of people. You can make sure it's framed well, and then you can go click, and you can take your picture. Very much a novelty, and it actually works, but it's not a fountain pen, so never even considered it. And then the last one I have, this is not a fountain pen either, but it's very interesting. It's made by a company called Napkin, and it's called the Forever. So it is very interesting. It's very long, slender. It doesn't have a lead or an ink or anything like that. Something about whatever the heck this tip material is made of. If you write on any type of paper, here, I'll just write on my dot pad here. If you write on paper, it's just the friction of the way that it writes. It looks like pencil lead. It looks exactly like graphite, but it's not graphite. It never wears down. It's just something about the reaction of whatever this material is, and the paper causes that friction and makes it write to look exactly like graphite. This is something we had considered carrying, but it was a little outside of our swim lane. So if you're super interested in this, let me know. Very much a novelty, but kind of interesting. So cool technology anyway. And those this is carried by the same folks that do Monteverde Stipula. It's by Jaffa. So they had shown this to us, and we're like, oh, this is a little outside of our thing, but it's kind of neat. So maybe I'll just keep one. I've never really shown it to you guys, so I thought I would show it to you now. So it's very thin though. That's the thing. If they made it in a thicker thing, it would almost be good. But if you're a pencil lover, this may be kind of interesting to you. Yeah, you can do some shading stuff. I don't know. Just kind of neat technology. And that's pretty much all I got for the weird and novelty stuff. So I think that's a pretty good amount for today. My question of the week for this week goes back to something I was talking about earlier here. What are some good books that you've heard about or read about on fountain pen stuff? Specifically, if you have ink and paper stuff, I'd like to know that, but really fountain pens in general. I'm still kind of zoomed in, aren't I? I would be curious to know what you have experience with. There's a lot of stuff out there. There's literally decades and decades of history to look back upon, and there may be books that were published in the 80s that are really solid that I've just never even heard of. So I would love to hear about them if you have any feedback on that, or handwriting, or really any kind of just other resources, hard resources. That would be good to know, because I do get asked about that a lot, and I always feel like, I really feel like I should know more about that at this point, but I don't, so I'm willing to learn. That's it for this week. Be sure to subscribe to YouTube if you haven't already, and make sure you ask questions for the following weeks, because without the questions, I'm just sitting here talking into a camera. So I appreciate it very much. Be sure to check out a lot of what I talked about here, not so much the novelty stuff, but a lot of the other products I talked about here on gouletpens.com. and you can ask us questions on the blog, YouTube, Facebook, you name it, Instagram. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. Had a good time with you today, and right on.